It's a comprehensive evaluation of an organization's values, beliefs, behaviors, and practices to understand the current workplace culture and identify areas for improvement. That's the fancy way of saying, are we doing the basic necessities to keep our people engaged? Are we setting the stage so that the people have what they need to be as successful as possible? Are we giving our people the tools that they need? Or are we just throwing them out there into the wind and saying, figure it out?
Welcome back to Relationships at Work, your guide to building workplace connections and avoiding those leadership blind spots. I'm your host, Russel, a communications and leadership nerd with a couple of very successful decades in both of those areas and a whole heap of curiosity on how we can make the workplace a better place. If you're a leader trying to understand and improve your impact on work culture and the employee experience, well, you are in the right place. A place that I wish organizations started more often at before they try to implement change is in understanding where they are. It's great having a vision. It's great having a mission. But we need to understand foundationally where we are first to even understand where we're going and how we're going to get there. And we need to do this in a really honest and open way. For example, executives wanting to talk about the cultures they want without actually taking the time to understand the culture that they have. And if that current culture is even capable of building that future culture that they want, that they're promoting, that they are pushing for. And here's a little tidbit, a spoiler. That executive is also part of the culture too. They have to keep that in mind, not separate from it. A culture audit is an amazing way to find out what the ground is like under us, what foundation we're actually trying to build from. Here's the problem though. In a 2023 Organizational Culture and Ethics report, this was done by Audit Board, they found that only about 20% of those organizations they surveyed did an internal culture audit. That's 80% who did not. Now, this is predominantly in the US, but it is an interesting sign. I want you to think yourself, when's the last time your organization did a cultural audit? Whether it was across the entire organization or even just within a team or branch. My guest today wants to change our minds in implementing these, helping us realize the importance of this step, especially if we plan on taking further steps. Hold on. And on the show today, we have Aleha Ingles, and here's why she is awesome. She's an instructor, speaker, U.S. Air Force veteran with 6 associate degrees, overachiever, 2 bachelors, and 3 masters, all focusing on the concepts of leadership, management, and culture. She's literally hoarding degrees. She's the driving force of Work Culture Works, a consultancy helping organizations to understand their current culture and in taking the steps needed to change and improve them. And she's here to help us understand where we need to start editing and looking to improve. Hello, Aleha.
What's going on, Russell?
Thanks so much for being here. Yeah, culture audits. That's interesting. But before we get into that, I have to ask you the question I ask all of my guests, Aleha, which is, what is your best or worst employee experience?
That's a very interesting question because that's exactly why I do what I do as a culture expert. So while I was active duty, I was deployed in 2015 and I experienced a sexual assault while I was deployed. I did not report it. I didn't deal with it in the best way. So I came back and naturally I was erratic, emotional. I was not behaving the way that I normally would. And my leadership, instead of asking, why is our top performer all of a sudden a piece of crap? Why is our number one troop all of a sudden not performing, not where she's supposed to be? Instead of asking those questions, they started punishing me for not meeting standards. And so when I started digging deeper and deeper into depression to the point where I became suicidal because of the way they were treating me. And thankfully, I had somebody on my team that recognized the signs, and he was able to come pull me out of that and help me find that the sources that I need, the resources that I need to overcome it. But that person that led the pack that pushed me into that place never apologized, never acknowledged what they did wrong. And so that's why I do what I do today, because I don't want anyone else to ever feel what I felt to that point where I wanted to die because of how I was being treated in a workplace environment. So, yeah.
It breaks my heart. Well, first off, that story, I'm so sorry. The other part very much though as well is the people don't understand that horrible experiences that is trauma, not a bad day at work. It is something you carry for decades with you. But and I mean that's on the extreme side of things. But some leaders just think, well, they won't, it's just don't worry about it. It's a thing. But then that, as we know, as you know, as we all know, 20, 30 years later, there's still scars based on that one day, that one moment. It doesn't matter. Looking back as an expert in audits now, what were some of the possible red flags that you would be looking for now that you may not have been educated enough to look for then?
Oh man, the first thing I would have looked at is what is our leadership doing to be aware of their own team, the people on the team. I was the one that they would call when something was wrong. You could always call Aaliyah. If you ever needed anything, Aaliyah's gonna have the answer, or at least she'll know somebody that has the answer. And not one person stopped and thought, "Wait a minute, something's different." And so I would have said, first of all, where are my leaders and why are they not aware of what's happening? Why is not one of you even questioning the significant shift in our most reliable employee? Not one person. So I feel immediately that's on leadership. What are my leaders doing? They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And I also would have looked at conflict management because obviously no one's even considering the fact that there might be some conflict going on that may have led to something like that too.
What shocks me in that example is that you don't even have to be a good leader. Like, you don't even have to be
No.
the most human-centric leader. You could just be the leader that needs to deliver a thing, create a service, the lowest, a manager, a supervisor, basically a checkbox exercise. And if you notice there's a person not getting you the thing or fixing the problem, and you still don't ask questions, ah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
shocking. So let's help organizations figure out where to look for these canary in a coal mines, these red, pink flags, or not even red flags yet. So let's start with definitions though, because I want to understand what a
Yeah.
cultural audit even is. So can you explain what auditing is in relation to a workplace culture?
Yeah. So the technical definition, dictionary.com, it's a comprehensive evaluation of an organization's values, beliefs, behaviors, and practices to understand the current workplace culture and identify areas for improvement. That's the fancy way of saying, are we doing the basic necessities to keep our people engaged? Are we setting the stage so that the people have what they need to be as successful as possible? Are we giving our people the tools that they need? Or are we just throwing them out there into the wind and saying, figure it out?
Can this be confused with other workplace organizational assessments? Because I've seen a lot done where they're looking at, your personality or how the organization's functioning. Is this a different piece or does it work hand in hand?
I think it's definitely worked hand in hand. The personality test tells you how to arrange your people where their strengths are going to be most effective, but it doesn't dig into the little things like what's your customer experience look like? Because your customer experience is a reflection of your employee experience. Your CX equals your EX. So, are you even looking at what it looks like at the bottom? Are you considering, do people even know what your company values are? Do your employees, if you asked your employees right now, can you recite your mission, vision, and company values? If they can't do it, then sorry to say it, but leadership is failing.
Do you find that a lot of leaders will be more interested in what the culture could be rather than what the culture is? And I ask this question because a lot of organizations will go, what is our culture? And they're looking at it as a North Star, as a vision statement of the culture they want, when they don't even
Yeah.
recognize if they even have the culture to attain that future state.
Right, right. And the thing about culture is it's constantly evolving. There's always room for improvement, and you can't just set it and then forget it. You can't, because people are constantly learning, growing, and changing. And so your culture is going to consistently learn and change and grow with. So you have to consistently do that audit to look for those places for improvement.
So I guess that leads me to the question is, what should we be focusing on in a workplace audit? Are we talking culture and leadership? And like, where is the buckets for this audit?
So I a long time ago when I first started my organization, I created the 7 pillars of work culture. And these 7 pillars are in my experience, in my research for my doctorate program, are the 7 most impactful elements that impact your work culture. And that's your company values, your customer experience, employee development, pay equity, and equity, not equality,
Mm, mm.
leadership, communication, and conflict management. Those 7 things are the most impactful things on your work culture and your work center.
Is any of those more important than the other, or is it an equality thing?
It's definitely it definitely shifts. Not one's not more important than the other, and one doesn't impact more than the other. But depending on where your organization is in, development, one could be more impactful now, and then as you grow, a different one will start impacting.
So, Aleha, you've gone into these organizations, you've done these audits. How have you
Mhm.
seen them impact a workplace culture?
I would say that one of the ones that no matter where the organization is in growth, leadership, and pay equity are gonna be the top 2. No matter where you are, those 2 are going to be somewhere in the mix. And it could be anything from I should clarify when I say leadership, because leadership, it doesn't necessarily mean your leaders are bad. It could potentially mean that your leaders just aren't aware of some things that they need to be aware of. But again, that also means that they're not as involved as they should be. So, and when it comes to pay equity, the reason I say equity and not equality is because everyone, equality means that everyone starts with the same pay. But equity means that everyone gets the right pay based on their experience and education and what they bring to the table. And so if you've got someone with 10 years experience and a brand new person on the job, and both of them are getting the exact same pay, you're going to have some disgruntled employees. It's just the way it goes.
So, as much as I would love the time to go through every 7, I want to focus on one specifically, and I'm going to nerd out a bit because, as I've mentioned on the show, I'm a communications nerd. So, I really want to dig a little deeper into that one specifically.
Yeah.
What are the red flags when it comes to communication? What are the things that an audit would specifically be looking for?
Um, People that don't reply to emails, that's a very big one. That's a real big one. Because if you think about it, if someone emails you, it's because they need something. And if you choose not to reply, you're leaving that person without the tools that they need to succeed. And you're also showing them a certain level of disrespect because they're trying to get a job done and you have sent the message to them by not replying that their job is not as important as yours.
Could it also be, and this is where it's not as black and white, and obviously there are
Mhm.
grays. So, for instance, you're on one side going, I emailed you, you didn't respond. The other person's like,
Mhm.
I am so busy that you are not the top of my list of to dos. I would get back to you, I'm just not responding as quickly as you want me to respond. What does that
Yeah.
say about a culture?
It means that that person has too much on their plate. Period. Period. If someone can't reply, just say simple, "Hey, I don't have time to gather that data for you right this second, but I'll get back to you within 3 days," or whatever. Even that is still better than just not replying. So if you can't even give a simple, "Hey, I'll get back to you in a few days," then that person is overworked. That person needs help.
Do you find though that definitions matter? And I loop back to that. So for that same example, someone's definition of timely is different than somebody
Mhm.
else's definition of timely. Neither are wrong, but it is a problem when you're trying to define what the bar of success is.
Ye
How does
Yep,
that
so that's when you put it in your expectations, right? Expectation management is something that I harp on a lot. A great example is one of my doctors, she's always late to our appointments, and so I already know she's going to be 15 to 30 minutes late. That's the expectation, and so I don't get upset because I know that she's going to be late. People get mad when there's an expectation that doesn't get met. So if I expect to hear back from you in 48 hours and I never do, I'm going to feel disrespected. But if I know the standard is 72 hours, then I'm not going to get mad. It's all about expectation management.
it's almost a different way of looking at trust too, because if I know you and I expect you're going to be late, I can trust that you're going to be late. I trust that
Mhm.
you're not going to show up in
Yeah.
the way I need you to. But it's a context and confidence in understanding that who you're working with might work differently than you, which of course, Aleha, makes me think of diversity, because
Yeah.
definitions are different by different cultures, by different generations. I'm thinking that
Yeah.
timeliness, what a boomer might think is timely, is not what a Gen Z or Gen Z thinks is timely.
Bingo.
I'm assuming that are we speaking from the same song sheet before we do the survey is
Absolutely.
important.
Absolutely, yeah, and putting that expectation in your company values or maybe your SOP or employee handbook, putting that expectation in there sets the standard so that everyone is going off of the same expectation.
Who's responsible for all this, Aleha? Is it executive pushing the audits? It's HR with their limited budgets coming in and going, we really should do this. Like, who should be implementing them and how often should they be implementing them?
I would do a culture audit every 6 months. Every 6 months, and I don't think HR should be involved. HR should, and the reason is because HR's hands are tied a lot. There's a lot of things that HR cannot do, and something, if they're aware of them, legal actions have to be taken.
Right.
Whereas if you're aware of it, if someone else outside of HR is aware of it, maybe you can get it addressed and fixed and corrected before it has to become that, that involved.
Does it influence the audit based on who's delivering it? Because you're saying about HR not doing it. And I know there's some conflict with HR because the perception is, are they serving me or are they serving the executive? Who do they actually report to? Are they looking out for me or their best interests? So
Yeah.
I can see the delivery. We're back to communication. It's not just what you say, but who says it can
Right.
influence this.
Yeah, I and the thing with the culture audits is you can pay a third party to do it, but it's really not necessary. You can do it from the top, but you it has to be supported and reinforced by the top. The C-suite has to champion the culture audit because if they don't believe it, no one else is going to.
Where do organizations get it wrong? We're doing an audit. We're doing this thing, but there's as with anything, it's sometimes not smooth or sometimes not as successful as it could be. So what are some common
Yeah.
challenges?
So the one thing that I see most common is it's a concept called management by announcement, and this was come up by come up with by S. Chris Edmonds, Edmond, in a book called The Culture Engine, and he talks about management by announcement, meaning leaders they spend all this money to determine where the holes are in the culture, and they say, all right, this is what we need to do to fix it. They go out and they say, now do all these things to fix it, and then they walk away. No one sticks around to make sure that these things are actually being implemented at all the correct levels. And so you just throw it out there and expect everyone to just know what to do, but they don't, because if they did, they wouldn't have needed you to begin with. And as Chris Edmonds, he talks about, when you implement a culture change, it's kind of like when you're talking to your teenagers. If you want your teenager to take the trash out, you don't just say, go take the trash out and expect them to do it. It's not going to work that way. You have to walk them over to the trash can, show them how to pull it out, show them how to tie it, show them how to put a new bag in, walk them to the dumpster, because that's how teenagers operate. And employees are not that different. You cannot tell them to go do something and then just expect it to just happen. You've got to walk them through it and make sure things are being implemented the way your vision wants it to be done.
That brings me flashes back to my own childhood where my dad didn't understand the difference between telling me what to do and asking me what to do, asking me to do a thing. Because if you told me to do a thing, little 6-year-old Russell, his back would get up. He immediately put up a wall. You don't tell me to do anything. You ask me to do a thing, and I'm moving mountains. I will do whatever you need me to do. And that's just like, this is special. People think this is a special thing in the workplace when it's just humans being humans. The same stuff you act and respond to in life are the same things that happen with the humans at work. So to treat it special, like executive going, not my problem anymore, I delegated. Not how this works. That's not leadership.
Right. Delegate does not mean dump it on someone else and walk away. Delegate means that you're still responsible for it to get done. You're just asking someone else to support you and help you make it come to fruition.
And I'll take that one step more, is that it's not just about responsibility, it's accountability. It's not just you're responsible for that survey happening. You're accountable for the results. If they're bad, that's a reflection on you as a leader. What are we going to do about you as a leader? Yeah, we talk about responsibility, but that accountability piece, we need to talk about that a lot more.
Yes. One of my favorite catchphrases is accountability is uncomfortable. It absolutely is, because it requires things that we don't do on a daily basis. It requires self-reflection and introspective thought. It requires us to acknowledge when we have made mistakes. And that is a very uncomfortable place to be.
I would love that, not only to be accountable to acknowledge the mistakes, but fix them so they don't ever do them again.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So how do you get an executive who spends all this money, that does all these things, and then you're like, and now you have to do something with the data. The data is useless until you actually do something with it. Because I've had a lot of guests on my podcast who have done audits or surveys of employees. The minute executives saw them, didn't like the results, and were like, thanks for letting us know. And then it's crickets until the retention rate is 0, right? How do you move the needle on that?
I like to show them the cost of turnover, because a lot of them forget how much it costs. They say, well, if they want to quit, let them quit. Okay. If you want them to walk away, that's fine, but you're looking at a $15,000 cost. And when you're talking about recruiting and retraining someone new because you didn't want to acknowledge that this human being has needs just like you.
How do you ensure you're getting open and honest employee feedback? Because you can have a healthy culture and still have a business area that's not doing great. Or you can have a toxic environment and people are either going to be oversharing, or they're going to ham up because it's going to be career suicide, less of a lack of a better word. So how do you ensure to get that good information?
Yeah. The foundation of having a healthy culture is all about creating that psychological safety. You're never going to get someone to be honest with you if they don't feel it's safe. If someone feels like being honest with you is going to result in them getting fired or their boss treating them like crap the next day, they're not going to be honest with you. You have to create an environment that creates psychological safety where people feel it's okay to be honest and it's okay to make mistakes because someone is not going to be accountable if they don't feel safe to acknowledge that mistake that they made.
So what does success look like? You've done the audit, you're looking at the results. When does Aleha go, oh, this was a good audit? Like what is the bar?
I look at retention rates, but I also like to include feedback participation rates because if you're not getting a good show on the number of people that are willing to conduct these surveys, that's an automatic fail. If people aren't willing to do the surveys, automatically that means they're afraid to be honest with you. Automatically that means there's something going on that they don't want you to know about and they're afraid to be honest. If you're getting that high retention rate, that high participation rate, then you're on the way up. You know you're looking on the way up. Yeah.
Do you have any story? Obviously, we don't name names here, but do you have any stories where you went in, did an audit, and it was that light bulb moment where they were like, oh, I didn't realize, and they actually shifted the culture?
Yeah, so this one actually happened pretty recently. I had a business owner that he had a lot of lack of accountability in his company, and he really wanted to hire a CEO that would come in and kinda clean house. He didn't mean it in a disrespectful way, he just wanted people to remember that accountability is important and that, if I ask you to do something and you promise you're gonna do it, I'm going to expect you to do it. Simple things like that. So he hired this new CEO and kinda said, "Now clean up shop," but he didn't stay and make sure that the CEO was actually doing what he wanted him to do. So he dropped him into the office and then left, and then what this guy did was he ended up firing all the good people, and the only people left were the ones that were desperate to keep their job. And when someone is in that place, they're not gonna perform well. They feel like they're, under fire. They're afraid the whole time. Nobody's gonna ever perform at their maximum capacity when they're afraid for their job, and that was the only kind of people that were left after the CEO came in. And so I had to come in and say, "Look what just happened." The perfect example of you saw the holes, you knew what the problem was, but you didn't try to implement anything that created that psychological safety. You just told this guy to come in and clean house, and all he did was get rid of all your good people. Now you've got to start from the bottom up. What you doing? And he said, "Oh my God, I didn't even realize that was happening."
Ah, I feel, as much as I am critical of leadership, I feel sorry for a lot of leaders because they don't have the training. They don't have the awareness to even know that these are red flags, to know that a culture
Yeah,
is broken because they're thrown into a position far before they're ready, no training. And then, hey, now you're an executive if you move up the ladder 10 years later.
right. Yeah, yeah.
So what's the tipping point for leaders to know they need a cultural audit? Is it, so it's the you said it's the retention, but there's a lot of people that will stay and a lot of people that will slowly leave. It's not a big change right away. I mean, obviously the pandemic was a big shift,
Yeah.
but generally retention is not a big spike. It's a gradual thing over time and not something sometimes as obvious unless you're looking for it. So
Mhm.
what would be just, you know what, this is the sign you need to look at, because if you're not, then you might have a bad culture.
Those exit interviews are
Oh, right.
gold, because that's when people are no longer afraid to tell you the truth. If you ask someone, honest to God, "Tell me the truth, why are you leaving?" If someone really did have a poor experience at your company, you're gonna find out in that exit interview.
So interviews are funny. And I agree. I smiled as soon as I'm like, yes, exit interviews.
Oh, I love them.
Oh, but I wrote this recently in one of my newsletters, is that sometimes you'll notice employees won't want to do an exit interview. And I don't think some leaders
Right.
are curious enough to ask, because that person's like, oh, I know what you do with the data from exit interview. Nothing. I know that I'm
Nothing, yeah.
trying to get the hell out of here, and you want me to spend this time doing a thing that is going to be a waste of time for me and you. You're just doing a check box. That needs to be a
Yeah,
sign that you have a cultural audit if people don't even want
absolutely.
to be
And
honest with you. Yeah.
your exit interviews should be conducted by your C-suite, not your HR.
Interesting.
Your C-suite, because they're the ones that can actually make the changes. HR is gonna give it to whoever is they report to, but again, it's going through so many people that by the time it gets to somebody important, do you really trust it? I also love, love, love customer experience feedback. So your customer reviews, I said previously CX equals EX. It's a perfect example of if your customers are pissed off, I promise you, your bottom line employees are pissed off. They're not going to give your customers the best experience if they're not getting the best experience themselves. It just is what it is. So whenever I get a poor customer service experience from another company, I automatically know their culture is crap. I already know.
And sadly, that will probably be the final straw for a bad leader, the customer side of things, because customer equals money. If they're ignoring employees, but customer
Yep.
equals money, then finally they listen. And that's a sign of a broken culture too. You have to wait for
Yeah.
customers to complain before you start recognizing.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Absolutely. I call the customer experience the CEO's litmus test. If you really want to know what's going on at the bottom ranks, check your customer feedback.
What are the tools to audit? Are we surveying? Are we doing one-on-one interviews? What's best practice or better practices? I hate the term best because they can always be better. What is the better
Sure.
practices for this process?
Honestly, the best way that the most effective way to get the most accurate information is to pull in a third party. It just people, even in the most safe, psychologically safe environments, you're still going to have some people that are afraid to be honest. It is what it is. But I would say if you want to do it yourself, if you want to conduct a self audit, that's perfectly okay. But I would take a hybrid approach. I would do surveys, I would do interviews, I would do, you know, the customer feedbacks. I would take all of that and put it into one aggregated data. You're never going to get 100% honest feedback on those surveys, even if they're anonymous. Let's be honest. They're not really anonymous. They're really not. And some of us don't care, when I do my surveys, I'll tell you everything. I don't care if I'll put my name on it for you. I don't care. This is what Aleha said this. Yep, on this date. Yep. But not everybody is like that. So I would definitely take an aggregate approach.
I love that you brought up anonymous, because I'm of two minds with anonymous surveys. On one side, if people can only be honest if they're anonymous, that's a sign that the culture might be broken. But the other flip side is there's a lot of introverts and a lot of people that do not want to put their name to things. And that's where the diversity inclusivity thing comes in, where
Yep.
they don't feel open. They feel shy from being honest. And that's a them thing, not necessarily a culture thing either.
Right. Right.
Is there an audit between the audits? Because so you're talking about audits every 6 months, which a lot can happen in 6 months. And there's some people listening going,
Yeah.
we do it every year. We do it every 3 years.
Yeah.
Which again breaks my heart. Is there something organization could or should be doing in between those 6 months to at least lay the groundwork before that audit happens.
Absolutely. So that kind of goes back to, you know, you're constantly pulling this data with your customer feedbacks, your exit interviews, when your supervisors should be sitting down with their direct reports regularly. I say at a bare minimum monthly, but realistically more often than that. And those that's the time when you can give them that psychologically safe environment to say, how are you? Do you have all the tools that you need? Is there anything that is prohibiting you from succeeding? Is there anything that you're missing? Is there anyone that is making things difficult for you? And if you're creating that psychologically safe environment, then people are going to be open and honest with you about that. And that then once you get to that survey every 6 months, people you're not gonna have any surprises because people have already been telling you.
What are you feeling on pulse surveys as a way to sort of continually sort of check in from a week to week basis?
I They're not bad, but they can become monotonous. They can become something that when people say, "Oh, let me just click through this to get rid of it," you know? When it's too often, people just look at it as a chore.
And they need to see that you're regularly doing something with that information, that the information is not just going to a void every week, going, yeah, I feel a 7 out of 10 today, and tomorrow I might feel a
Absolutely.
10. But what do you do? Are you tracking this? Does anybody even look at this?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, one thing that I love to suggest is post the results on, a community board or something that people can see. Not actual words, but, the percentages of, if someone the rating and the scales and everything like that. So if someone is feeling a little not involved or not included or disgruntled or whatever, and they look at the board and they say, "Wait a minute, I'm not alone. 72% of us are feeling this way right now. Okay, maybe we're onto something."
Trend, Aleha, trends. We should be paying attention to trend. And you circled back to the communication thing.
Mhm.
If you're not communicating results, that's part of a communication problem you have within your own organization.
Right, right.
Have you ever done an audit and had to do another audit? Has it ever gotten to the point where you're like, you have to do a do-over?
Oh, yeah. I had one that was so bad, the results were so low that I said, "There's no way this is accurate." Even for me, and I've seen it hundreds of times. I saw this, I said, "There's no way this is accurate. I'm gonna come back in a month and redo this." It turned out to be pretty accurate, unfortunately. And it was because the leadership at the top was completely unaware of the problems at the bottom. Completely unaware. It's not that they wouldn't do anything if they would have known about it. They just didn't know. And that is one of the largest problems that I encounter is 85% of work centers in America report some level of toxicity within the ranks, but senior leadership is only aware of 5% of that. So there's a massive gap. There's a massive gap of why is the C-suite never aware of what's going on down here?
You see so many studies that show what executive thinks and what employees know. And
Yep.
that gap seems to be getting larger. And I did a presentation to a bunch of C-suites and I brought up that example and you could feel it in the room where they were like, no, that can't be true. I'm like, you're literally
Yeah.
part of the problem by thinking that.
Right, right, right. The moment someone tells you something, you need to go look into it immediately. The lack of understanding or awareness, just scratch it right now. Just go look into it because I promise you, there's some level of truth to it.
I think I think you've nailed it there too, is that curiosity needs to be the biggest reason why you do something like a cultural audit, because you can't assume you know everything. You can't assume by being at the top of an organization in an office that you only see 3 people every day is the culture of the organization. And
Right.
and
Yeah.
yet it's not so obvious to a lot of people that it's this is their world, so they don't look beyond their world. So curiosity feels like the biggest motivation to do a cultural audit?
Yep. It's that fishbowl mentality. We get so caught up in what we do every day that we only see what's inside our fishbowl, that we forget that there's a whole world outside of that fishbowl.
Thank you for this, Aleha. I really appreciate it. I'm like, no, really, we're rays of sunshine. Honest. It's about doing better. I promise.
Yep.
So I'll before I get to the last question, I have one more question about surveys, which is, say an organization's even considering doing a cultural audit. What would be the tipping point or the thing to convince them to go, you know what, this is the thing you need to do?
I would say if you have employees that aren't willing to stay for at least a year, you need to be doing your culture assessment at least every quarter until that retention rate goes up, because 63% of U.S. companies find it harder to retain than to hire right now.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Because there'll be a lot of leaders that will look at these numbers and still think, do I want to spend the money? Do I want to invest? And look at, maybe it's a checkbox exercise. Maybe we'll do that. So yeah, I was just kind of curious, what is that one nail in the coffin that will just finally, I use a horrible metaphor because it's a good thing, not a bad thing as a nail in the coffin.
Right.
But what is that? What do you need to hear to be able to understand how important this is?
You can spend $2,000 to send somebody to leadership training or $10,000 to replace them. You decide.
Oh man, I'm not going to touch that. Let's go on to the last question, because that is a beautiful way to end this. So Aleha, last question, which is, in your experience, in your leadership journey, what's one simple action people can do right now to improve their relationships at work?
Listen to understand, not to respond.
Love that one. It's a classic, but it needs to be mentioned like every other week to so many people, me included sometimes.
Tattoo it, maybe.
Now that I don't want to touch. That is Aleha Ingles. She's a instructor, speaker, and she is the driving force of Work Culture Works Consultancy. Thank you so much for being here, Aleha.
Yeah, it's been fun. Thank you.
That is it. That is all. That is another Relationships at Work, finished and done with a little bow on it. This is your guide to building workplace connections and avoiding leadership blind spots. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you had a few light bulbs when it comes to cultural audits. If you enjoy these episodes and you enjoy our mini episodes that drop every Thursday, I highly encourage you to check out Raw Notes, which is our newsletter, which comes out every week. It's some really great takeaways from the guests that I have on the show, as well as some insights for me, myself, and I about the state of the workplace and how we can be better, how leaders can be better in building those relationships and connections at work. If you're curious, if you're interested, go to russellawlacher.com or relationshipsatwork.ca. At the top, you'll see a little button to sign up, follow all the instructions, and there you have it. It'll come into your inbox every week for free. Thrilled and excited to have you join me there. Anyway, that's it. That's all for this week, and I look forward to talking to you again, whether it's this Thursday or next Tuesday. Take care.